Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on the internet. Alright, today's video is the result of last week's Patrons Pick Poll. So every week I put a poll over on Patreon for our awesome supporters over there, and they get to vote on a video that will get featured in the short future. All right, and the video that they chose this week is how did the world react to the American Civil War? And this is by a channel favorite, History Matters. I think this is good because I wonder about that a little bit myself. Like, most of my audience is from the United States of America, but there is a considerable and growing, it seems like, viewership from outside of the United States. And I would like to know more about what the reaction was. Did the rest of the world, historically speaking, even notice it? Did they care? Did it have any impact on them? Because we look at, as an American myself, like from that perspective, right? And it's like, who really cares what anyone else thought? It had more of an impact, of course, on the United States than anywhere else. So I think this could be very useful for me, and for basically anyone else as well. Now, the original video link is down below. Please support History Matters by checking out the video, clicking the link, giving the view time a like, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe. And if you like what you're seeing here, I'd love to have you as a sub, and definitely hit that thumbs up video. It really helps the channel out. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
It shouldn't surprise you that when the American Civil War broke out, it was pretty big news all over the world. But how did the rest of the world react to the American Civil War?
Well, that right there, then I already asked one of my questions in the prelude here, which was, did anyone really notice? Was it actually talked about?
Did they plan to do anything about it? So, before starting, it's important to know that the USA wasn't seen by many of the world's nations at this time as a major player. A rising star for certain, but the USA wasn't seen as being equal to Europe's great powers, not even Austria.
And that makes sense. It's really not until probably after the American Civil Wars, which takes place in the 1860s, because after that you got another kind of stage of the Industrial Revolution, which was happening in America, but it really got accelerated after the American Civil War, as industrialization was already going in process. But it was one of the reasons why the northern states defeated the southern states was they had a more industrialized army, amongst other reasons that they for that happening as well.
As such, many leaders saw the American Civil War as being a bit of a sideshow to events in Europe at the time, like the wars in the Italian peninsula or that time that the Danish provoked Prussia into a war.
See, and those are events that Americans have no idea about. Like Prussia? Most Americans, I'll be honest, don't know what Prussia is or was, right? Or some war that was going on. To Americans, for the most part, it's like you had the American Civil War as far as like global wars going. American Civil War, maybe, and then maybe like the Spanish-American War, and then World War I hit, and it very like not sure of what had happened in any time in the 1800s or anything like that. Just so you know, but I'm sure a lot of you already knew that if you were outside of the United States, that there is an ignorance for the Americans about global conflicts. Once the history of the United States starts, it's like nothing else was going on unless it brought America into it, like the World Wars.
Europe's major players sent observers to the USA to see what tactics and technologies were being used, and they were, frankly, not impressed with the quality of warring going on. As for reaction, starting with the USA's neighbour to the south, Mexico, its government's initial reaction was one of awkward silence. It had just finished its own civil war, and due to its previous war with the USA, there was no love lost. Yeah,
there was a war between the United States and Mexico. It's called the Mexican-American War. It took place in the 1840s. It ended up with, just to shorten up, the result ended up being, there was some border disputes and stuff like that. But it ended up being a victory for the United States, which they annexed and took much of what's today like the Southwest American United States. So the American Civil War starts in the 60s, was about 20 years after that. So not very long, and Mexico was recouping from that, which in a way territorially almost cut Mexico in half.
Not that it had much time to think about it, since in late 1861 the French invaded, and so they'd spend the rest of the war having their own problems.
Right.
As for the North, Canada was a series of British imperial domains at this point, and as such its foreign policy was determined in London. That said, the people of Canada were firmly in the camp of the Union, and many thousands of volunteers went south to fight against the Confederacy.
Okay. Yeah, I actually would have been very surprised to hear that Canada was more supportive of the South, which just wouldn't have been, I think, wouldn't have been the case. Now, if you don't know, there was international involvement in the Civil War. The British did get involved, as well as the French, as well a little bit. So it wasn't totally isolated.
Whereas to the British, the American Civil War was seen as a surprise and one which complicated Britain's foreign policy.
For sure.
You see, Britain imported a lot of cotton from the now Confederate States.
This is the big
and given
part.
that many parts of the country financially depended on them, the British were keen to see the war end quickly for economic reasons. Now, this didn't have to be a Union win, and British shipyards produced several warships for the Confederate States. The Confederacy hoped that Britain would recognise its independence, which would likely lead France to do the same and would strengthen its position diplomatically. Britain never did this though, because it didn't want the United States to invade Canada. Wars were expensive, and the overwhelming majority of the British public supported the Union, especially when the cause of the war moved from restoring the Union to abolishing slavery.
That's interesting, because it's like from an economic point, the British are receiving the benefit of the slave labor production stuff that's happening in the southern states, but from a moral perspective might look at the North, or the Union as it's called here, because of the abolishment of slavery in the northern states versus the southern states for the most part. So that is kind of a dilemma in a way, economically versus like what they might see as morally, because like they said, in Britain they had outlawed slavery before this.
And over the years, many thousands of people living in the British Isles, overwhelmingly Irish, went to the US to fight for the Union. Thus, the Confederacy got little help. As for the French, its reaction was the same as the Austrians, that these developments were a welcome surprise. It allowed Franco-Austrian intervention in Mexico so that Maximilian Habsburg could be placed on the throne there to increase their influence in the New World, and also to give back the money that Mexico was refusing to pay its creditors. Both
MONROE Doctrine. That's where basically what the United States said, this would be kind of a violation of what they say there, which is, hey, Europe, don't get involved in the Western Hemisphere. We won't mess with... You know, the United States saying this, we won't mess with Europe and those like the stuff going on over there, but don't come over here and mess with the Western Hemisphere. It's like the United States is like calling dibs on being the foreign power that can influence actions going on in the Western Hemisphere.
Nations had unofficial...
By the way, I love this dude. I love him on the left. The great nose and stuff. That's awesome.
Contact with the Confederacy over mutual...
Not an emperor.
Yet neither France nor Austria did anything because they knew it would mean war with the United States.
Yeah,
whereas Prussia's reaction to the outbreak of the Civil War wasn't one of shock, but that it brought with it opportunity. Despite being disappointed with the quality of their troops and tactics, Prussia favoured the Union. Prussia was itself a very conservative state, but its leadership knew that acting against the Union would negatively impact its image amongst the very pro-Union German-speaking world, which, as you'll know, it was trying to unite, and so by pushing itself as a firm ally of abolitionism and the Union, Prussia's image amongst the German-speaking world could be improved with very little effort.
So, I mean, it seems like so far these giant nations, they're obviously thinking of themselves first, like what benefits them, and there might be a moral issue, but you're not going to see them get involved on a moral issue when a bigger issue is things like what's the economic, influence of taking one of these sides. I think that's gonna be a big one. Or thinking, hey, let's not piss off. We don't want to do something to piss off the Americans. Right, and that makes sense too.
And what about Russia? American leadership was bolstered by a large Russian fleet sailing to their coast, which they hoped would help them blockade the Confederacy. But fun fact, no. The fleet was actually there to stop itself from being caged up in the Baltic Sea in case of war with Britain, as tensions between the two were high. Tsar Alexander II was an outspoken ally of Lincoln and pushed for the total destruction of the Confederacy.
By the way, I'll just tell you this. Somebody who grew up in an American education system, you never hear about these type of things, like who's supporting whom, unless they actually went and firmly entrenched themselves in something like the American Revolution or the American Civil War. You never hear about I never knew, I had no idea Alexander supported Abraham Lincoln. You didn't hear that. You didn't hear that kind of stuff. And if I was young, I probably wouldn't have known who Alexander was anyways. But I'm just saying, that is just not something you would have heard of. What did Austria think? What did this? You never got taught that kind of stuff. So this is actually a lot of it new to me is who support. I had no idea like these support lines happen this way.
And as for the Ottoman reaction, they were overwhelmingly pro-Union. They signed a trade deal with the Union, banned Confederate
Didn't know
troops
this
from their
either.
waters, and also made a ton of money since they were the second best source of cotton for European markets, and their main competitor had just been blockaded.
Makes sense.
In all, the world's
Economics.
reaction to the outbreak of the Civil War was one of initial surprise, followed by it asking itself, how can this benefit me? I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for watching, with a special thanks to my patrons, James Bizanet, Sam, Kelly Moneymaker, The Pastry Section, Danny
Love our
Maloney,
patrons.
Mo, Marvin Cass,
Patrons everywhere.
Waterhouse, James
07s to you.
Jordan
My
Monroe,
patrons,
Spinning
these
Free
patrons,
Plates,
all the
Gustav Swan,
patrons.
Jerry Lambdin, Rashid Ali, Marcus Arsner, Izzy, Maggie Pakskowski, Colin Castleman, David Silverman, Coppertone, Anthony Beckett, Matthew Shipley, Lexi Schwinn, Robert Wetzel, Sky Chappelle, Winston Kaywood, Aaron the White, Spencer Lightfoot, and Phobo Joe.
Phobo Joe. I want Phobo Joe's support. All right, let's talk about it. All right, so on a very basic level of knowing what the response was, yeah, a lot of informative stuff going on there. I mean, we were able to see these specific countries about what side that they had done. Looks like a lot of pro-union support in the most part, even if it seems like economically speaking, these other countries might benefit more by supporting the South just from the fact of slave labor, the economics of slave labor, right? Which as a consumer of slave labor products means you're going to have lower prices, right? But then you got to, of course, deal with the moral issues that are happening. And by the 1860s, abolitionism across major world nations was pretty big. America is kind of late to the party in a lot, in you know, some of these nations, at least ones that maybe hadn't, if they hadn't abolished the slavery, of the major nations weren't doing it on the scale that necessarily the Americans were. You know what I mean? Like, it's a huge part of the economics of America is the slave labor, because of its, you know, it's the manufacturing that comes out of that, extraction resources, stuff like that. But yeah, it seems like from this point you do see that more support, a little bit more support for the Union and rooting. And it's not like, again, a lot of these nations necessarily got involved because they don't want to piss off this, you know, a side or something like that. And it just, like, the benefit didn't outweigh what the bad thing could be, like the bad result, you know. So yeah, but just knowing who sided with who, I think, was really fascinating to see that. So that was really cool, and can definitely lead me to look more into specifics about these specific nations and their relationship, like Tsar Alexander, and being like a fan of Lincoln or supporter of Lincoln. Like, I'd love to learn more about that. So it's good. These kind of little short videos, you know, this channel does a lot of stuff. It's like 4 and 5 minutes, and it's good to just kind of get into a topic and then hopefully branch into something a little bit more specific. That's what I like about small videos like this. All right, well, great. Thanks again to my patrons. Love all of you, and thank you for supporting. Thank you to everyone that's supporting all kinds of different ways. Channel members, you guys that have been doing that as a monthly thing to be able to support the channel, thank you so much for doing that. And you don't have to be donating or doing anything monetarily to support this channel. I really just glad that you come and watch and give a thumbs up. If you come talk to us on Discord and in the comments, I truly do appreciate you, and I love our awesome little community that we have here. All right, with that, there's some links down below to some other things. Check out my gaming channel. I do a lot of gaming stuff, and a lot of it is historically related. Got a lot of fun things going on there. So I stream on Twitch, and my YouTube gaming channel. Links to that stuff is below, as well as some other things too that you can check out. All right, with that, we'll see you next time. Bye.